Hi everyone. For the purpose of this presentation, we have selected to determine how to best serve transgender and gender nonconforming students. This presentation is brought to you by Pamela Gonzalez, Ben Hurt, and Lisa Tolliver. This population has been in the news recently. North Carolina is in the process of implementing a bathroom bill which requires people to use the multiple occupancy restrooms and locker rooms that match the biological gender found on their birth certificates. Some bills also force colleges to label multi-occupancy bathroom and locker room facilities for men and women only. Similar bills have been implemented in Mississippi and proposed in numerous other states. These laws may or may not come to fruition, as a federal court of appeals has recently struck down a high school in Virginia's attempt to the same rule. Regardless of whether these bills are implemented or not, they show that institutions of higher learning must consider the safety of transgender students first and foremost. Because as long as we're unable to support gender nonconforming and transgender students' basic human rights to safety, we'll be unable to support them as students. Um, Based on this, the overarching way that we would measure success in serving these subset of underrepresented students is with increases in enrollment, increased retention, and awareness of the entire student body as well as employees at the university. We believe increased enrollment and retention is proof of a safer and more welcoming environment for transgender students. However, based on research, we also believe it must go beyond just numbers to assisting the general population in understanding the experiences and ways in which diverse students add meaning to everybody's experience on campus. We've developed specific secondary outcomes for the institution and two sample function areas, residence life as well as academic advising. We believe the achievement of these secondary outcomes will operationalize the primary outcomes. So first, we want to take a look at what success means, right, in this proposal. And so increased enrollment, increased retention of students that are already on campus. And we want to do this by intentionally creating a safe, supportive, and inclusive community on campus. Um, we'll do this, right, like we said, through these secondary outcomes that'll be presented throughout the presentation. And these secondary institutional outcomes underpin these three primary outcomes that we're hoping to achieve. By increasing transgender and nonconforming student populations with a target of at least 10% of the student population within the next 5 years. And then we want to retain these students. Once they're on campus, we want the campus climate to be welcoming and safe, and so they feel like they can stay and continue to pursue their education. So we're hoping to retain at least 65% of enrolled transgender and gender nonconforming students, and this would be self-identified from year to year, beginning in 2019, the 2019-2020 academic year. The third is to increase the general student body's awareness of transgender student experience and the meaning that they add to campus. So we want to inform and educate all students on campus. Revising forms will be one of these secondary outcomes. Forms will have a fill-in option for gender rather than multiple choice. And we want to get this done within 6 months. And revise institutional and departmental non-discrimination policies to include gender identity or expression rather than referring to the gender binary of men and women. And we're hoping to get that done within the next 6 months. We took a look at this, and really the budgetary consideration for this shouldn't be much at all. I mean, maybe some work hours for some people to change the forms, maybe get it approved, some things like that. But really within 6 months, we hope, and especially most of these forms are electronic, so it should be able to happen quite quickly. So achievement in this area will be when it's 100% compliance with forms that are both on the web and then paper also. And we could evaluate with a quantitative approach, quantified by data points with how many students are filling out the fill-in option for gender rather than multiple choice. Creating gender, the next secondary institutional outcome, creating gender neutral space on our campus. That's very important to our primary outcomes, really all three of our primary outcomes. So we hope to change some restrooms in both academic buildings as well as locker rooms in athletic facilities. And the proposal that we put together, we thought it was a great idea to utilize pre-existing space, right? We could just shift the language to be more inclusive, and certainly we could collect some data on the use of multi-stall restrooms. There may be some that are underutilized on our campus, and so we could take advantage of that underutilized space, converting a multi-stall restroom into a single occupancy with the appropriate labeling. And so with that, we're not trying to create or build any new space. We're just reallocating some pre-existing space. We think that these ideas, the cost will remain minimal since we're already using the pre-existing rooms. It would really just be to change the signage and again, the man hours to collect the data, see which restrooms may be underutilized. We really think that this one is pretty important to all three of those primary outcomes in recruiting students, in retaining students, and promoting this continual education for other students on campus. The third secondary institutional outcome is to increase professional representation. The idea behind this is that if there are more transgender or non-gender conforming faculty and professionals on campus, this will automatically make the climate on campus better if these people are in a position of leadership. And they can really help in that continual education piece to other students. They can help with the recruiting as well as retention efforts. So we'd like to recruit and hire qualified transgender and genderqueer faculty and professionals. And so if we utilize affirmative recruiting strategies, we can certainly tap into populations around the country where there's qualified people that can do these jobs. To measure this achievement, we want to check out the growth each year in the transgender and genderqueer faculty population on our campus over a 5-year period and see how we're doing, see if that's increasing. The data analysis would be quantitative, right? We could take a look at the percentage of growth per year or the percentage of decline, whatever the case may be, the percentage of change year to year in that 5-year period to see how we're doing. Now, the idea here with budget concerns is that we just want to diversify our current searches, not necessarily hire new people, hire new positions. However, if new positions are being created on campus, we could certainly make a push to diversify those searches as well. The fourth secondary institutional outcome is to create a GLBTQIA resource center on our campus. And so the center would include a couple of positions. Perhaps at first it would just be an educational specialist or a director, and then move towards having both, a director of the center as well as someone who is an educational specialist. this center could really oversee a lot of things, the continual education, perhaps be involved in the recruitment and some retention efforts. To measure, we take a look at the hiring process, the launch of the center, and then assessing the learning outcomes for the center. We could take a survey, and really here's kind of how we thought we could collect data on our campus before the resource center is established. Really survey some students, find out what the campus climate is, especially with attitude towards GLBTQIA, transgender, and gender nonconforming students. And then after the resource center has been established, and then a year after that, and maybe a couple years after that. And that way, we can see what the climate was like before and compare it to what the climate was like after. Would be a great indicator on whether or not the creation of this resource center and the creation of these new positions was a success. For this secondary institutional outcome, it certainly plays a large role in those three primary outcomes of recruitment, retention, and continued education on our campus. But the budget for this outcome would be substantial. I mean, there would be a development of space, whether that's existing space or in a new building. Either way, it's going to cost quite a bit of money. And then the salary for the new position or the new positions. We would ideally hire some student staff. There would be the cost of marketing materials, etc. Just the cost of getting a resource center up and running would be substantial. However, we feel that this would really be one of the most effective, right? The creation of this resource center could really shift the campus climate. And we would hope to track that and assess that through collecting that campus climate survey. So now we'll take a look at our functional areas. So we're going to first take a look at residence life, and then we'll take a look at academic advising. In addition to the overall institutional outcomes, every department will need to determine its own outcome for meeting the needs of our transgender and gender nonconforming students. Here you can see the proposed Department of Residence life outcomes, which include immediate as well as long-term solutions. The immediate and biggest concern is making sure transgender students have a safe space to be, with access to a restroom, and staff and faculty are knowledgeable and able to support. As a result, we need to take the summer to find a trainer or develop a training and to ensure our policies are worded inclusively. And so we see on this slide we're taking a look at changing the policies so that transgender students have a single room. And we want to get this done quickly so that when these students move in the fall, they have a safe space. We could compare the inclusive housing policy with other institutional websites to track and see the best practices around the country and how we're doing with that, if we're keeping up with it or if we're breaking into new ground. We also think we could include transgender awareness training room. Include transgender awareness training from a student support perspective in RA and professional staff training. This is something that would be immediate also. This could take place over the summer. That way, once the RAs and the professional staff are there and students are moving in, they're ready. We could certainly do a pre-test before the training and then a post-test after the training. And the combination of qualitative questions and quantitative questions could really show us the effectiveness of this training on the RAs and the professional staff. And then the last two here that we could look at are implement an open housing option and a gender neutral living and learning community within the next 2 years. So this is more long term. We're looking at holistically, um, let's make a welcoming community for these students. To do this effectively, we thought it would be really critical to hire appropriate and skilled resident directors and RAs, especially the RAs for those floors, people who oversee those learning communities. We thought that this might be better to hire rather than trying to train, and really search for people that had the right skill set to be effective here. And then lastly, and this would definitely be long term, but this again, kind of like building the resource center, would be most effective, would be to create or build a gender neutral restrooms in all community style residence halls. The next functional area that we'll take a look at is academic advising. And so we have two ideas for academic advising. One is to include LGBTQIA ally training as part of the initial advisor training. When advisors come to our campus, they go through a training um, on how to be advisors and what the curriculum and departmental requirements look like. And so if we included this in that training, um, they could really be supportive for these students, and this would definitely assist with recruiting as well as retention of our students. Um, in addition, we want to do an ally training for existing staff members. That continued education is critical for staff members who have already been on campus. And so we want to try to get that done within the next 3 to 4 months. To do this effectively, we would want to hire a temporary staff member, an expert in the field that could lead 4 ally training sessions. And then once the academic advisors have completed their trainings, they'll graduate with a certificate that indicates a staff member to have completed the training. And so we have an image there, and definitely our institution could develop our own image that a staff member could display in their office. There are many institutions around the country that have images like this that show a welcoming space for students. To assess this, we could do, again, a pre-test and then a post-test. We could test the staff on their knowledge and compare the data from the pre and the post-tests to gauge the effectiveness of the ally training success. And then secondly, for academic advising, we thought we would want to spread awareness in the academic advising office regarding communication, right? The gender neutrality of our communication to students in order to make the space as inviting and comfortable as possible for the LGBTQIA, the transgender, and the non-gender conforming students. So we'd want to remove any posters or signage that promotes gender bias or promotes the gender binary. The signage would need to be rethought, replaced, or maybe last resort, just remove it entirely. But I think there could be a way for us to take a look at our signage and perhaps make it a little more inclusive to all populations. Individual offices should be reviewed, as well as the central office and the lobby of our academic advising center. We would want to make sure that students feel welcome not only when they walk in the front doors, but when they're sitting down with an advisor and really talking about their academic plans. Achievement will be when all gender bias signage has been either rethought and replaced, rewritten, or removed entirely. And we could gauge this by taking account the number of signs that we thought were maybe not welcoming, and comparing it with how we did at the end. And we could even have a committee of students or professionals on campus come and assess And that way we have an outside perspective and perhaps a student perspective that could really gauge the welcoming, the inclusivity of our space, both before and after, to really see how we've done, if the changes that we've made were effective. Throughout the presentation, we've shared how we would operationalize our secondary outcomes, believing that these are the key to achieving our primary outcomes that are listed above. This slide further illustrates how we will measure the achievement of these primary outcomes. In conclusion, the secondary outcomes discussed during this presentation are the means by which we will operationalize our initial primary outcomes. As can be seen from the quotes on this slide, climate is an incredibly important piece to student success and an important piece to the success of our outcomes. We believe if we are able to meet these secondary outcomes, we can create a safe and inclusive campus environment that encourages all students to understand that everyone matters and understand how diverse students can positively impact everyone's experience. This in turn will increase recruitment and retention of transgender and gender nonconforming students, as well as understanding within the general student population. Thank you, and we look forward to your feedback.